Powerlifting is going through a period of rapid growth at the moment where we're seeing records being taken to places that we never thought possible. However, with that growth comes an increasing number of questions surrounding the natural status of the elite powerlifters. In this video, I'm going to be answering that very question that everyone seems to be asking, are they really natural? And I'm going to be presenting 4 arguments as to why I believe the answer is what it is. Now, initially, I wasn't going to make this video because I don't generally like speculating about this sort of thing. However, I've been getting a lot of comments on my videos lately about people saying that, surely what these people are doing is not possible and how do they keep getting away with it? And rather than replying to those comments individually and presenting my arguments, I thought I would make a whole separate video so I can just refer to this when people inevitably keep questioning the natural status of these athletes. But okay, are the best in the sport on the tested side really natural? My view is yes. Yes, they absolutely are. Now, before you start running to the comments and telling me how stupid and naive I am, just hear me out, okay? Because I have 4 arguments that I believe will convince you by the end of this video that yes, the top IPF powerlifters in the world are in fact natty. Now, I know what a lot of people are, going to say about this, and that is that being tested does not mean you are PED free. And of course, we all know the popular example of this, right? Lance Armstrong. And what I will say about this is, yes, I agree. Being tested does not guarantee that you are PED free. However, being tested and being amongst the best in the world, or being the best in the world, also doesn't guarantee that you are on PEDs. Now, this video, I'm going to slightly reframe the question here, right? Because really the question isn't whether or not these athletes are on certain substances, because I can't answer that question. At the end of the day, no one knows that but the athletes themselves. Really, what is at the center of the question is it naturally possible what these athletes are doing? That is at the core of it, because at the end of the day, anyone could be on stuff, right? I know people that are using PEDs that aren't any stronger than just the average powerlifter, right? Let alone anywhere near world-class level strength. So rather than ask the question, are they natural? I propose, let's focus on this question instead. Is that naturally possible? Right? Now, the 4 points I'm going to address in this video are going to be targeted towards this question instead. So I'm going to be answering the question of, is that naturally possible? Is what the best powerlifters on planet Earth are doing on the tested side, is that naturally possible for a human being? Right? And then at the end, we're going to circle back and answer the question of, are they natural? Right? But first, just hear me out, right? Extend this olive branch, let's focus instead on this question. Okay, my first point. Raw powerlifting is a very young sport with a rapidly growing talent pool. Powerlifting is one of the youngest sports there is today. Do you know when powerlifting started? All the way back in 2012? 2012? 13 years this sport has been a thing. 13 years. Our sport has only barely entered its teenage years. Now, I know what you're going to be saying. Powerlifting existed long before 2012. There were people back in the 90s and 80s, hell, even 70s doing powerlifting. What I mean is that the sport of raw, tested powerlifting, as we know it today, started in 2012. Everything that came before that, yes, the IPF has been a thing since the 70s. That was all equipped, right? And yes, raw powerlifting existed in certain federations in certain places before that. But we didn't have any world championships. We didn't have any recognized official world records. Really, the sport started in 2012, the sport as we know it today, right? And it's been growing since then. Now, if you're saying that what is being done today at the top of the sport is not naturally possible, then in essence, what you're saying is it only took us 13 years from the inception of the sport to find the peak of human genetic potential. Really? That's all it took. 13 years is all it took for us to reach the pinnacle. Do you honestly believe that to be the case? I know goldfish that have been alive for longer than this sport has. Now, to illustrate this point even further, I'm going to be drawing parallels with different sports that have been around for a lot longer than powerlifting and looking at where they were in their relative progression after 13 years. So I'm going to start with boxing. Those of you that have seen some of my previous videos will know that I'm also a big combat sports fan. So I'm going to go to boxing as an example. The first world-recognized heavyweight champion of the world in boxing was this guy right here, John L. Sullivan, in the year 1885. So let's look 13 years after that. Now, this is going to be 12 years after that, 1897. But this is the heavyweight boxing match between Bob Fitzsimmons and James J. Corbett, where Bob won the world heavyweight boxing title in 1897. Now, I appreciate that not everyone watching this are combat sports fans like I am, so I'm only going to be showing a short clip of this. But I think you can appreciate, and you don't have to be a boxing nerd to know or to see, that's not exactly Floyd Mayweather or Muhammad Ali in there, right? That is what the sport of boxing looked like 12 years after its inception. Also, the wardrobe and clothing choice has clearly come a long way, because I don't know what the hell that clothing choice was there, but anyway. So there you go. That's one example of a sport. 12 years after its inception, and compare that to what it looks like today, very different. Now, I know we're going to be saying to this, what does this have to do with powerlifting? This is just boxing, completely different sport. Okay, fine. Let's look at a different sport then, a sport that is more similar to powerlifting, and let's look at sprinting, specifically the Olympic 100-meter sprint. Now, why do I say this is more similar to powerlifting? Because like powerlifting, it is a raw expression and output and measurement of a human characteristic, right? Except instead of being strength and power like powerlifting is, it is speed and acceleration. So the inaugural Olympic gold medalist in the 100 meters was this guy right here, Thomas Burke, in 1896. So we're going to round up a bit here. We're going to go 16 years into the future and look at the Olympic 100-meter gold medal race in 1912. And this is it right here. Now, that was either a false start by that one guy, or everyone else just got off to a terrible start, because that was a shocking difference off the line. But there you go, 10.8 seconds. Ralph Craig won the Olympic gold medal in 1912 with a 10.8 100-meter final race. 10.8 seconds is still very quick today, don't get me wrong, but there are high schoolers that can run 10.8 seconds. 10.8 is not going to get you anywhere near the Olympic Games or Olympic finals, let alone, right? So again, after 16 years, we saw a growth in the sport, because I believe the first gold medalist was around 12 seconds or 11 something. So yes, it grew a lot. But did it grow to its peak and potential? No, it didn't. That is nowhere near the sub 10s and 9.58, Usain Bolt records that we've seen since, obviously. Now, let me address the second part of this point, which is to do with the rapidly growing talent pool. Now, this is in response to the people that will say, okay, great, you've shown us examples of boxing and of sprinting, but those were back in the early 20th century. The advancements we've seen in the centuries since in sports science, medicine, nutrition, recovery, all that means that a modern sport like powerlifting can in fact reach its peak potential in 13 years. Now, my counterpoint to that is, number one, we are still seeing advancements in sports science, nutrition, training methods, recovery. Okay, so to think that we've maxed out everything and we've optimized everything simply cannot be true. We are still advancing in that realm. My second point is the fact that I'm saying powerlifting can't possibly have reached its limit within the first 13 years. That's not necessarily to do with stuff like sports science, nutrition, all those other factors. I'm talking more about the talent pool of the sport. Now, talent pool has been a phrase used quite a bit in powerlifting lately. So I wanted to illustrate it in very simple terms. So blue, imagine that is a global talent pool of athletes available to powerlifting. In red, you have some genetic outliers for powerlifting, people that with the right training have the potential to be absolute freaks. I'm talking the Austin Perkins, the Agatha Shitgoes, people like that, right? Now, imagine in 2012 when the sport started, the powerlifting talent pool, being the pool of competitive powerlifters who are actively competing in the sport, let's say that is represented in green. Now, in the 13 years since 2012, let's say the talent pool has grown about that much. So we're finally starting to see some of these real genetic outliers in powerlifting emerge. Like I said, the Austin Perkins, the Agatha Shitgoes, the Nonso Chinyes, the Jesus Olivareses, right? However, where do you think we're going to be in another 10 years time, 20 years time, 30 years time, hell, half a century? Where do you think we're going to be in the sport? The talent pool is going to continue to grow, and it's going to continue to grow to a point where we're going to see more and more of these genetic outliers enter the sport and push what we thought was previously the limits of human strength, which obviously was not the limits of human strength. It was just the limits of human strength in what we thought was a filled out talent pool, and really we just haven't found those one in a million, once in a generation athletes yet, right? So again, if you're saying that we've maxed out the sport's potential in these 13 years and we've found the absolute limit of what a human body is capable of, then you're saying our talent pool is pretty much maxed out. Because if our talent pool is still growing, which trust me it is, and it will continue to, then even just the statistic likelihood that we've found the best that a human can do is so absurdly low. I refuse to believe that we've maxed out the human limit in 13 years. I refuse to believe it. So there's my first point. Okay, point number 2. This is gonna be a controversial one. You might not like hearing this, but people underestimate the genetic variance / potential in the human race. Okay, now to illustrate this, I'm going to use height as an example, and I'll explain why, and I'll draw the parallel back to strength and powerlifting in a second. But for now, let's look at height. The shortest human being ever measured is Chandra Bahadur Dangi, who you see in the photo there, who measured at 54.6 centimeters tall, just over half a meter, which is 1 foot and 10 inches, right? Shortest human ever recorded. The tallest human being ever recorded is Robert Wadlow, who stood at 2.72 meters tall, 8 foot and 11 inches, almost 9 foot tall this guy was. Now you can see there's presumably an average sized human next to each one of them for scale, so you can just imagine what they would look like if they stood side by side, and the difference. Now both of these people, they're both human beings, they're both members of the human race, but look how different they are. Look at the sheer difference in scale and size of two members of the human species. Granted, these are the two most extreme cases. This is literally the tallest and shortest ever recorded, right? But look how different they are. Now, the thing with height, and the reason why I like using height as an example for this, is because height is something you can measure and you can see very easily. It can be very easily quantified. Strength, not so much, because yes, you can quantify things like muscle mass and, body fat percentage, stuff like that. But strength is a bit different because it's not exactly independent of those things. Obviously, it's related to muscle mass, but it's also other stuff like, attachment points of muscles, tendons, neuromuscular connections, stuff like that. Stuff you can't really see. So it's harder to visualize this with strength, whereas with height, it's a lot easier. Okay, so bear with me with this example here. Imagine you took every human being who has ever lived, or let's just say today, right? Every human being alive today. And let's say you sorted them in a very long line in height by ascending order, right? So on one end of the line, you would have the shortest people ever, which, somewhere around this guy's height, let's say. And on the very other end, you're going to have the tallest people alive today. And again, you're going to find someone who's slightly shorter than that guy right there, Robert Wadlow. So imagine you've sorted the entire human race from shortest to tallest in that way. Now, you will see the variation. you wouldn't expect that the shortest person was that short or the tallest person was that tall. And that is simply because the majority of the people you interact with on a day-to-day basis fall somewhere around the middle, somewhere around the median. Your tall friend that you might know could be 6'4". The short guy you might know could be 5'3", right? But they're still far away from the extreme ends of the scale, right? Now imagine we take this same line sorting system of people, but instead of taking the shortest on one end, tallest at the other, let's take the absolute weakest and the absolute strongest, and let's sort them that way, right? So on one end of the line, you have the weakest person ever. On the other end of the line, you have the strongest person ever, or the person with the greatest strength genetic potential, right? Let's put it that way. Now, if there is such a difference in the extreme ends when it comes to height between what we perceive to be tall and short, why wouldn't there be just as much of a difference between the extreme ends of the scale when it comes to strength and what we perceive to be very strong and not so strong? Why wouldn't there be as much variance? Height is a physical quality just like strength is. Again, it's more easy to see and quantify and measure, right? But it's still just a human physical characteristic. So with the fact that there's such a big variation in height, why wouldn't there be a big variation in strength? Imagine the strongest guy that you know, and it could be just like the tallest guy you know. The tallest guy you know, like I said, could be 6'4", nowhere near the height of this Robert Wadlow guy, right? Just like the strongest person you know could be nowhere near the strongest person to have ever lived, or the guy with the highest strength potential ever, right? And that's the thing with powerlifting, is people assume that what is being done today at the top of the sport can't be done because they're like, you know what, I know a guy who's on all sorts of stuff who's nowhere near that strength level, or myself, I'm on all sorts of stuff and I'm nowhere near that strength level, so therefore they can't be as well, or they must be using stuff as well if they're that strong. Well, the thing is, you're just at a different place in that scale when it comes to strength than the top level powerlifters, and that can be a hard pill to swallow, granted, I will give you that, but it is a fact nonetheless. These two people didn't take any substances to achieve their heights. They were just genetically coded that way, right? You could have someone in that median range of height try and take every substance they wanted, try and do every procedure they wanted, short of extreme surgery, and they would never get anywhere near the heights of these two men. Why? That's just not how they genetically coded. Simple, right? Now, let's take it back to real life examples when it comes to this strength slash muscle mass thing, right? This is a human being right here. For those that don't know, this is Francis Ngannou, former UFC heavyweight champion of the world, an absolute physical freak this guy was. This guy weighed about 265, the upper limit of the heavyweight division, so about 120 kilos, lean, packed with muscle, super explosive, super athletic, just an absolute physical specimen this guy is, right? And he built this physique in the sand mines. Now, he also obviously did strength and conditioning training, but you see early photos of him, he was always jacked. This is also a human being who has strength trained for a number of years now. Now, I'm not trying to throw any shade here. All I'm saying is that these two humans are very clearly have very different physical makeups and physical genetic ceilings, I guess, when it comes to strength, right? However, they're both humans. Now, again, where these two people are on that theoretical scale from weakest ever to strongest ever, I think that they are far from the extremes, despite the major differences we see between them. Now, I know what you're going to say, oh, that Francis Ngannou example, he's also on PEDs. Okay, well, let's look at someone who could not possibly have been on any PEDs because he was around before they existed. This is Eugene Sandow. If that name sounds familiar, it is because the Sandow Trophy given out to Mr. Olympia was named after this dude. He was alive from 1867 to 1925, and this is what he looked like. Again, an absolute freak, an absolute specimen of the human race for back in his time. Now, testosterone was first synthesized in 1935, and it was only really used, started gaining popularity in the 40s and 50s. This guy passed away in 1925, 10 years before testosterone was synthesized. So this guy, 100% you cannot argue was natural, right? Now, also keep in mind that the bench press was invented, or said to have been invented, in 1899. So this guy would have been in his 30s by the time the bench press was even invented, and that is what it looked like. That's the physique he carved out when bench press didn't even exist. Not to mention, knowledge when it came to training and nutrition and sports science and recovery was nowhere compared to where it is now. That is what he looked like. Now, if that is what someone can look like in the 19th century, right, the 1800s, before the invention of the bench press, with such primitive training methods, such primitive equipment, primitive nutrition, primitive recovery standards, if that is what a human body can achieve under those conditions, you can't possibly tell me that everyone we see that has an insane physique or insane strength level today has to be on PEDs. How can you make that argument? Look at this guy, right? This guy could step on stage today and do well at a local amateur show. Not to mention what he would do with today's training and nutrition and all that sort of stuff that I mentioned, right? So, yeah, you just can't make the argument that everyone who's impressive is on something, because we've seen people like this in the past. Now, the possibilities either are that Eugene Sandow was the Robert Wadlow of strength potential, and he was the strongest ever in human history, and that's why he looked like this. That's a possibility, sure. Far more likely, though, that he was someone who was definitely an outlier for his time, definitely far above average. But if that is what is capable back then by someone, imagine what is capable now by someone who is a similar outlier level. Exactly, that's where you get the Agatha Shitcoes, that's where you get the Austin Perkins and Nonso Chinyes, people like this who are just built different, right? I hate to use the overused phrase, but that's just how it is. And that takes us to the argument that people always have, and this is really where this argument comes from. People see something, they see a world record being set, or world record being broken, or weight being lifted that's never been lifted before by someone who's so strong, so young, so whatever, and they think to themselves, how are they that strong? How are they that strong? Now, oftentimes in life in general, the answer is the simplest one. In this case, the answer to this question I propose is, they just are. They just are. Imagine taking those Eugene Sandows of the day, or the Robert Wadlows of strength, who are just at the very peak, the very pinnacle, standard deviations above the median. Imagine plucking them, showing them powerlifting, getting them training, mixing their elite genetics with a passion for the sport, which makes them work hard and dedicate themselves to it. Imagine what you could get. You don't have to imagine, you just have to see the top of the sport today. That's where the Nonso Chinyes come from. That's where the Austin Perkins come from. That's where the best of the best today come from. However, people refuse, for whatever reason, to acknowledge this fact, right? They refuse to acknowledge this could be the case, and instead, oh no, it must be the PEDs. It must be the fact they're cheating. It must be the banned substances that they're abusing to get their bodies that strong, right? It must be. Now, I don't think it is. The reason, I can understand why people jump to this argument though, and I can't really fault them for it, because people, again, find it hard to believe the true scale of human genetic potential, and they refuse to acknowledge that there's people out there who are just, yes, they are just that strong. Human beings can in fact get that strong. That's how outliers work. That's how statistics and normal distribution and standard deviations work. There are people that exist at the ends of the scales. Of course, the majority will be at the middle, so it's very likely you will never meet or you'll never come across those people in your life, but you will see them at the top of the sport because that's how they got to the top of the sport, right? So yeah, I know it's not a very sexy answer, right? But this, I think, is the answer. How are they that strong? They just are. Okay, my third point. Powerlifting is one of the only sports that has an untested side, an openly accepted untested side, where you can go and you can compete and you won't be judged for what you take. You can take as much as you want. And we can make comparisons between the tested and the untested side of the sport, right? So like I said, you can go and you can take as many banned substances in whatever dosages you want to get as strong as humanly possible. And there have been people who have done that, who have emerged as real freaks when it comes to strength. And we can compare those people to the best of the best on the tested side. Now, people like to use this argument in favor of why they think people are cheating and are on PEDs, because they look at guys like Austin Perkins, who is the strongest 74 kilo powerlifter ever, regardless of tested or untested, and Jesus Olivares, who is also the strongest powerlifter ever, raw in sleeves, regardless of tested or untested. And people use examples like this to say, oh, how can these people be natural if they're stronger than all the unnatural people that lift on the untested side? Surely that's proof these guys are on PEDs, right? Well, no. My counterpoint to that is it's to do with the talent pool of the divisions, the untested and the tested side. So let's go back to my previous diagram that I had up. Obviously, this is not to any sort of scale, by the way. I should have mentioned that before. This is just an illustration to prove the concept. Let's say that green represents the current talent pool in powerlifting today. Now, within that, how much of that is the untested side? It would be this little purple dot. Again, this is not to any sort of measured out scale, right? It's just showing the concept. But you cannot argue with the fact that the talent pool in untested powerlifting is so much smaller. It makes up such a niche, small fraction of the total powerlifting talent pool. And that is simply because the untested side of powerlifting sucks. It is shockingly bad. I've made several videos on this and why this is and everything that's wrong with untested powerlifting today. So go check that out. I'll leave a link to it. But people are just not getting into the untested side of the sport because it sucks and because the tested side is so much better. Why would you put up with the negative health consequences when staying tested is way better anyway, right? So we're not seeing people get into that side of the sport. And that is why we're seeing some of the tested athletes now break records of the untested people simply because of the talent pool. We're starting to see those outliers in red who were never part of the untested talent pool. We're starting to see them get into powerlifting, and without substances, they're just better than the guys that were on PEDs. Again, how? They just are. I go back to that response that I had before. Now, the best way to compare, if you want to compare tested and untested performances, is to look at the outliers who have crossed over. So people that went from being the best in the world on the tested side to the best in the world on the untested side. Luckily, we can do that with powerlifting because there have been examples in the past of world champions and world record holders in the IPF who have crossed over onto the untested side of powerlifting. And I've made a video about this as well, powerlifters who have turned to the dark side. I'll also link that in the description, where I go into these lifts in more specific detail of these lifters. But a quick sneak peek of that, Yuri Belkin put over 200 kilos on his total from a world champion world record holder on the tested side to the 1070 on the untested side without gaining a significant amount of body weight. John Hack, again, put over 200 kilos on his total, gaining about 10-15 kilos of body weight when he switched to the untested side. Again, check out the video if you want more detailed breakdowns on their individual lifts. So the fair way to compare the best in the tested and the untested side is to look at the outliers on the untested side, the best of the best, and see how they stack up. John Hack, without a doubt, is one of the best of the untested side in powerlifting. His best total is 1043.5 at a body weight of just over 93. Now, that is head and shoulders above anything we see on the tested side. The 93 kilo world record is 917.5. The 105 kilo world record is, well, 940.5, 979, done by Anthony McNaughton unofficially. But this is well over 100 kilos above what any 93 is doing on the tested side. There is no one close to this on the tested side. So yes, if you take someone who has that potential to be the best in the world, and that, red genetic outlier that I had in the diagram before, if they are on the untested side, then that is what you get. You get these freaks of nature. And if you're comparing these performances, you can no longer say that the people on the tested side have to be on PEDs because they're stronger than the untested side. Because no, if you're looking at the best of the best and comparing them, the untested side is still way stronger, just like what you would expect. The other example, Colton Engelbrecht just put up the single greatest performance in powerlifting history, 1,200 kilos raw with wraps at 120 kilos bodyweight, 10 times bodyweight total at 120. This is the heaviest raw with wraps total ever done, regardless of weight class, despite him being a 120, so like 60 kilos below the big heavyweight guys, super heavyweight guys. Yeah, just absolute phenomenal performance. There are no superlatives for that. And again, there is no one on the tested side of powerlifting who is close to this. The 120 IPF world record is 978.5. Rondell exists and he's at 1045, but even that is nowhere near 1200, right? So this is what the pinnacle of untested powerlifting looks like. And if you're comparing this to the pinnacle of the tested side of powerlifting, then it's not even close. As you would expect, untested is that much stronger. Okay, my fourth and final point is there is little incentive relative to other sports to be on PEDs. If you're looking at other sports and other sports athletes who have notoriously been caught up in doping scandals, guys like Lance Armstrong, Barry Bonds, Justin Gatlin, what do they all have in common? They're all major sports, they're all professional athletes for one, in major sports where their wins guarantees them a lot of money and a lot of fame. Powerlifting doesn't have that. For one, powerlifting isn't even a professional sport. Yes, that's right. The best powerlifters in the world today have day jobs. Ashton Ruska is a clinical psychologist in the US Army. Delaney Wallace is an accountant. Durans Kengamu is a product development manager, whatever the hell that means. We're talking world champions, world record holders here. Each one of these three lifters have broken world records and won world championships. Let's look at Sheffield, the pinnacle of powerlifting today, Sheffield. Gustav Hedlund, who won Sheffield in 2024 and podiumed this year, also has a full-time day job. Shell Backlund, who won Sheffield this year, also has a full-time day job. I don't quite know what Gustav and Shell do, but I know they've spoken before about balancing the training with a full-time day job. So there you go. On the women's side, Karlina Tongatea is a doctor, for Christ's sake. Again, world champion, world record holder. In fact, the only fully professional powerlifter that I know of is Agatha Shitko. Everyone else either has a day job, or even if they don't, they're social media influencers, or they're coaches, they run programs, stuff like that to make a living. They're not making a living solely off of being an athlete in powerlifting. Apart from Agatha Shitko, and that's only because she has an infinite money glitch in Sheffield because she's just that good. Right? Now, this also takes me back to my point of how could we possibly have reached the peak of human potential in 13 years of the sport? We're still not even a professional sport, for Christ's sakes. We still can't even get to the point where the best athletes in the world are fully committed to powerlifting and fully professional athletes, as in that is where they make their income, right? We're not even at that point yet. So do you really think we've hit the maximum potential that a human being can do, given that the best athletes in the world still have day jobs? Hell, at the World Championships, when they introduce a lifter and they walk out, one of the things they have on the screen is their occupation. I don't know if they still do that. I know they used to do it up until a couple of years ago. They might have stopped now. But what other sport can you think of where in the World Championships, where they're introducing the athletes, they list their day job? No other sport does that because they don't have day jobs. They're professional athletes, right? All those other athletes that had those doping scandals before, they're in professional sports where their performance directly ties to income levels and fame, and that's why they do it. In powerlifting, that's not the case. Sure, if you are one of the best powerlifters in the world, you'll get some amount of money. It won't be enough to live on, probably, just in isolation. You'll get some amount of fame, sure, right, on Instagram, whatever. But that's not going to be like just general walking down the street fame. You'll be famous amongst powerlifting fans, sure, but that's still a pretty small subset of people, right? You're not going to be famous on TV. You're not going to be famous just walking down the street. You're not going to be rich beyond your wildest dreams. There simply just isn't that much incentive to cheat in powerlifting. That's just the case, right? And like I said, this also ties back to the point where imagine if these lifters were all fully professional athletes and not having day jobs, how much stronger they would be. Surely they'll get quite a bit stronger. Well, there you go. That just goes to show even more we haven't reached the human genetic potential limit. Now, my final point I'll make about this is when it comes to doping scandals in sports, often what is at the center of it is a huge cover-up, state-sponsored doping program scandal they got going on, right? It's what happened with the Russians in the Olympics. Germany did it at the Olympics back in the 80s or whatever. They have these state-sponsored doping programs, and that's how they beat the test. Now, I'm by no means an expert on this. I haven't had first-hand experience with any of these substances, but from what I hear, it's not necessarily easy to beat these tests, right? I've had comments before from people who have had experience with that side of things, and yeah, it takes a bit of science to be able to do it properly and to reap the benefits of it still. Now, is it possible? Sure, I'm not saying it's not possible, but in powerlifting, there just simply isn't, like, who would be doing a whole state-sponsored doping program in powerlifting? Who would be running this concoction, this backyard lab where they're able to get all these athletes past all these doping tests? Who would be doing that? No one, because the sport simply isn't big enough for someone to be doing that. There's no massive government conspiracy and cover up because powerlifting is such a small sport, right? The reason we're seeing an explosion of all these totals and numbers and records is because we're finally starting to find those genetic outliers in powerlifting. And we're going to keep seeing these records climb because, like I said, we're not even a fully professional sport yet. Okay, so there we go. I promised I would tie this back into the original question, which was, are they natural? Now that we've answered the question of, is that naturally possible? I believe the 4 points that I just made pretty conclusively answer this question to say that yes, what we are seeing today on the top levels of the sport of powerlifting is in fact naturally possible. And if you're saying it's not, then I honestly don't know how you can argue it's not based on those 4 points and 4 arguments I just presented. So if you can accept that what is being done is in fact naturally possible for a human being, well then I present you this. Why not them? If what is being done is naturally possible by some humans, why wouldn't those humans be these ones? Why wouldn't it be Agatha Shitko? Why wouldn't it be Austin Perkins? Why wouldn't it be Nonso Chinye? Why wouldn't it be these freaks that we're seeing today who are doing what we accept is humanly naturally possible? Why wouldn't it be them? And the thing is, you can't possibly have any argument against that. There is no argument against that because there's been no proof of any wrongdoing by any of them, right? So what happened to the whole innocent before proven guilty thing? You have to give them the benefit of the doubt, and there's no logical argument why they wouldn't be the particular humans who are capable of achieving these feats. Because remember, we've essentially, I'm not going to say proved, because I can't go so far as to say proved, but we've pretty conclusively argued that there are humans who are capable of doing these phenomenal feats we're seeing naturally. So it's not that much of a stretch if you believe that to say that, well, the humans that are capable of doing it are the ones that we're seeing doing it today. So then tying it back to the question of, are they natural? Well, like I said, to conclude, if we accept that it's naturally possible and we accept that there's no argument against why it wouldn't be the ones we're seeing today, then the answer to the question, are they natural, has to be yes. There is no other answer. They are in fact natural. That is what I truly believe. So there you have it. That is my argument for why I believe the best powerlifters today on the tested side are in fact natural. Again, in the comments, feel free to leave your thoughts. I take great pride in the fact that I've read every single comment that has ever been left on any one of my videos. So I'll guarantee you I will read your comment, and I've responded to almost all of them as well. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this, and if I've converted any one of you, because I know there are a lot of people watching my videos who have very strong opinions against this and who refuse to believe that these guys can be natural. So I'm curious to see if I've managed to sway any of you. But yeah, feel free to leave your comments, and I'll leave all those other videos that I mentioned linked in the description.